Now, I actually, if we have time, want to spend 5 or 10 minutes getting some feedback from you. I want you to think about some of these questions. Please feel free to answer any of them or to respond in any way to anything that I've said, but I'm much more interested in what you've gauged from this and how it has made you think, rather than just you listening to my banal lectures. So, take a minute, have a think, and anyone want to respond, please just raise a hand. And don't be shy. Yes, sir?
I have a family who are a different religion to mine. I won't mention what religion is, but yeah, they are devout in their religion. I've tried talking to them many, many times about my religion, and they don't want to know, and they don't want to change. They believe in what they believe, and I believe what I want to believe, and it's hard. It's very hard to communicate with them. The families, my father has not been well for at least a year and a half, 2 years. He's been in hospital, in and out of hospital, and I've had to travel back to Manchester to find out how he is and everything else. But he just doesn't want to change. He's adamant that he's right, his religion's right, and my religion's wrong. But I come home, pray for him, we're still talking. So, yeah.
You are the perfect example of precisely what I've just been talking about. You are telling that big story. And in many ways, I relate. My late father was a Muslim. My older brother, my late father was a Muslim, but he drank like a fish. He wasn't terribly religious. But my older brother is very staunch Muslim. And my mum is Church of England. And when I first, spoke to my parents about my newfound faith, they told me that they would never listen to a lecture about religion from someone whose bottom they used to wipe. That's what they told me. And so that's, we learned to leave it there. But see, here's the thing. You're not going to persuade everyone. But by living this story, that is, you have fulfilled, in my view, what it means to tell this big story. Yes, Anna Marie.
Thank you. It's been fantastic. It feels like you've elevated my faith to a...
Good.
And I love the idea of the once upon a time and the happy ever after. It is going to end happy ever after. What you have on the board that really speaks to me is why is it key to know other people's stories?
Yeah.
I mean, if somebody doesn't want to listen to me, how are they going to know where I'm coming from?
Yeah.
Or what makes me tick, or what helps me, or what harms me? And I think this is really crucial for our younger people, because
hit it on the head.
Say, they live in a different world. That word you said, I've never even heard it before. Slightly over.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say thank you, because for me, it's refreshing, and it's also given me sort of permission not to just stick to this narrow way, but actually broaden my views and go out, hear other people.
That's fantastic. And that's how I learned this, by the way, of thinking about other people's stories, was talking to young people. And trying to find out why it is that they are drawn to particular ideas. My next big research project, if I ever get around to it, is to do with masculinity studies. I'm particularly interested, my main interest is in the connection between masculinity and violence. I won't, again, bore you with the details. But I'm interested in why young men particularly are drawn to particular kinds of manhood. Because I think there are some very damaging images of manhood available on the market these days. And the only way I've understood that is by talking to young men, and young women, in fact. And it's, like you said, it's totally opened my eyes to a quite bizarre nether world, but one which I need to engage with if I want people to know this big story. Okay, now all the hands gone up. Yes, your hand up went first. Yes.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Laura, and I'm very grateful to have been invited here today by a very dear friend and my second mum.
Oh, fantastic. That's beautiful.
I giggled. I've just picked up Dawkins' Selfish Gene book.
Selfish Gene is actually not a bad book.
No.
The God Delusion Anyway.
I'm very glad that I'm here today because you've given me a lot to process, which is very pertinent to the particular journey that I'm on just
Okay,
now.
good.
I was born in Scotland in the 1970s and grew up here. People weren't as nice back then.
Right. Okay.
It's
Right.
a wonderful country.
Yeah.
I'm a patriot.
Yeah.
But different times, different eras.
Sure, absolutely.
And I grew up in the Church of Scotland. And when I was about 10 years old, and at the same time we're seeing the famine in Ethiopia, a very famous picture of that child dying waiting for the vultures to come. My brothers were being harassed and abused every day by teachers, police, people, grown men calling me names, a child in the street. And I lost my faith.
Sure.
I remember very clearly saying to my mum, I don't believe in a God that would allow this to happen. Not just what's happening to me, but there's children dying and so on. And I don't want to say that I lost my, no, I don't want to say that I turned my back on God, but I lost faith and belief.
Sure.
And in my past few years, I've experienced some incredibly traumatic, one point almost near-death situation. And in my healing, in my process from that, I've been coming back to my faith.
Good.
And I've been hearing God speaking to me in different ways. But I'm at a point of figuring out what that God means to me, because as a child, and I really liked what you said about how it's how we engage, the gospel doesn't change, it's how we engage with it.
Yeah.
I was raised with the white man in the clouds in the sky who was judging and looking down, and if we did right and wrong, which is why I couldn't understand so many people around me doing wrong and not getting punished. And as a child, that's a really hard thing to understand. So in these past few years, because I've been in hospitals and getting a lot of mental health support and so on, and one of the first things that doctors do is they pump you full of drugs.
Yeah.
I'm on a path now where, as a woman in my late 40s, coming up from menopause, I want to have no drugs in my system, no medication. I want to know what it's like to just be a pure person of God, how I would have been centuries ago before antidepressants and everything else, and heal myself through faith and through exercise and so on and so on. So what you've brought to me today is so crucial to where I am in my journey, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. I am going to add in just one little thing that I do struggle with. When you mentioned Damaris, is it
Hetaira is the plural, Hetaira is
as a feminist, and as we're looking at the gospel doesn't change but how we engage with it, why are we still considering prostitution and women who are in that role as a very low level standing? We don't know this is written by men who,
absolutely
like
right.
when you said about the Cretes and how they decided that all Cretes were liars. So it could be one man deciding that all women are this, that and the next thing, and those are the bits that still block me on my path back to faith at the minute, because it enrages me that we have Eve Was Framed. That's another good book to read.
It's a very good book,
Yeah, so I just wanted to touch on that. I'm entirely grateful for this whole presentation.
No.
I've been scribbling down notes, but that was the one thing that stood out for me.
No, I'm glad you said that, and I wish we had a couple of hours to talk about this. I really would want to engage you with a number of things that you've said. First thing I want to say is I really pray that this healing journey that you're on is really fruitful and really encouraging and really life-affirming for you. Because your story is actually a lot of people's stories, even people who don't know it. And I grew up in Brixton in the 80s as well, so I kind of know where you're coming from. Even as you were talking, I had a memory of coming out of work and being surrounded by a bunch of police who said that a newsagent had just been robbed and they thought I'd done it because of the jacket I was wearing or something. But anyway, I'm having flashbacks. I probably best not to go into that story. I'll just come back to this last thing that you said. I think that's most important for now. in the ancient world, there was a fairly rigid stratification of society. And if you were a woman, and certainly if you were involved in prostitution, you were by definition low status. Part of the reason why the early Jesus movement was so powerful was because they opened their doors to all kinds of people. There's a famous writer who said that, one who said that Christianity, he argued that how could anybody follow Christianity given that it was a religion started by hysterical women. He was talking about Mary Magdalene running back and telling the story of the resurrection. And he said no religion began by hysterical women is worth taking seriously. But another said that Christianity was a religion for three kinds of people, slaves, children, and women. And he said that because the Christian church drew those sorts of people, because those lines of social stratification were thoroughly blurred. And one of the ways in which now modern writers are having to rethink is, have we inherited some of that rigid stratification in our world, and I have to say it, even in our churches?
Yeah.
And I would argue that we have.
Yes.
And again, without going into the spiel now, I've been recently doing some work with domestic violence in religious spaces. And what I've noticed is it's not just something which the average person needs rewiring on, it's something which people who lead in Christian communities need rewiring on. And part of how that's being done, in fact, is by feminist critics of the biblical text, of whom some of my colleagues are some of the finest in the country. And in fact, one of my colleagues, it's interesting you mentioned that book, When Eve Was Framed, one of my colleagues, I'm sure she won't mind me saying this, her name's Dr. Holly Morse, but she's an expert on Eve. She wrote her doctoral thesis on Eve, and she even teaches a course on Eve and how Eve affects everything from third-wave feminism to DKNY's advertising campaign. So it is crucial that we get to those stories, but as I was saying to some other Christian students yesterday, that requires some courage, and it requires some rewiring of how we've seen the Christian faith. Sorry, Ali, we can babble on all night, so you tell me when to shut up, all right? So any other questions? And some hands up. We'll have Tina then Ali. Yes.
I just wanted to say I love how you come from a place of curiosity, which is so much less confrontational than arguing over facts or assumed facts. What is truth and what isn't truth, and also because it's more consistent with how Jesus approached people. He was always, meeting people where they were at in their story at this time, and whatever he did or said to them was kind of custom made to their particular circumstance, and that's how they, how he, ended up being, how people responded to him either so well or so, so badly, because it always attached directly to the story, and I love that, and I think being able to look at the next generation in that way and their worldview and what their stories, I think, will be really helpful, because I'm definitely one of the people who's very logical, emotional too, but I think this is just so obvious, and this is logical, and this is true, and blah, blah. Why can't people see it?
Yeah, that's how I feel most of the time. Yeah, but you mentioned a really important word there, and that's curiosity. And Christians must remain curious. And the more curious we remain, if you've ever heard the expression, keep an open mind, but not so open that your brains fall out, I think that pretty much sums it up for me. Remain curious, but remain skeptical. How I think even my own, view of the Christian faith has changed is because I'm always curious, but I'm always skeptical. Questions aren't a bad thing, right? The opposite of faith isn't doubt. The opposite of faith is certainty. I have no problem with people who have doubts about the faith, because that causes them to question. But people who are certain about everything frighten the life out of me. People who can't be told anything make me want to run a mile. Anyway, enough of my whinging. Anyone else? Yes, I said Ali,
Yeah, so I'm going to ask a question that people are too afraid to ask.
Go ahead.
So do you have the number for the Jedi's?
Touche.
I'm just inspired by that. Somebody needs to do a doctorate. No, as regards I think my understanding is changing all the time, but this idea of engaging with the culture and the framing of the gospel to shape the culture rather than the culture, because I'm becoming more and more aware of this.
Mhm.
So how do we engage today? I know it's through speaking, but there must be thinking outside. I love this idea of the narrative, and the Bible's a story. We need to tell people the story, but what's helping you to engage with the culture that we live in at the present?
A couple of things. One thing I mentioned, and I will say it again, is talking to young people.
Yeah.
And if you have, and I'll see a few people who look like they are under 25 dotted around the place. And if you're sitting there thinking, am I one of those people, then you're probably not. That's really the thing that's I suppose for me the strangest thing is knowing that I grew up without a cell phone or a smartphone or any such thing as social media, and that I turned out generally okay, I think. But knowing that there's a whole generation of people who don't know a world without it.
Yeah.
There was this just bizarre thing I saw of two people from that famous generation that I love, Storm. And they gave them an old-fashioned telephone, you know, one where you dial.
Oh, yeah.
And they put it in front of them, and they were sort of, what do I do with this thing? They didn't know how to dial. And it was showing them sort of the cogs turning. Oh, you're supposed to dial the number, and it was. But it was such an incredible sort of symbol of just of two completely clashing worlds. So really letting your young people in some way set the agenda, I think, is really important. The other thing, of course, is reading. I would definitely recommend books by people who are trying to understand the broader culture. I'd recommend a book by a chap called Watkin, called Biblical Critical Theory. And he's trying to think about ideas of narrative in the big story and connection with culture. And there'll be a bibliography in there, and there are lots of books of that sort. But the other thing, again, is just to be creative in how we read the biblical text. It was interesting. Sorry, lady over there who was speaking, what's your name? Laura. When Laura was talking about, you know, how could God allow a world like this with so much suffering and pain? Those questions have haunted me for years. But it made me rethink and reread the biblical book of Job. And I've always understood Job as a book about innocent suffering, but it's really not about innocent suffering. It's a book about what is the price of your righteousness? That's the question that the accuser asks. He asks God, well, does Job do what you say because you've given him a cushy life? What about if he didn't have a cushy life? Would he still do what you say? And that really is the critical question. If we took away all the things, the crutches that we lean on, what would our life then be like? And so even being creative and rethinking the biblical text itself and how we read those stories and how they engage with us and how they speak to us, I think helps us connect with culture as well. Those of you, I can see a T sign there. So one more question then, and then we'll move to the communion. Yes, sir. Oh, sorry for those who had hands up. Yeah.
Thanks.
Go for it.
My name's William.
Yeah.
Just a quick question.
Yes.
In terms of contemporary speaking now.
Yes.
There's a huge emergence of Christian community. So I mean, in all kinds of denominations.
Yeah.
We have audio books, gospel channels, radio channels.
Yes.
So for us that are mature people, where do we stand in now? How do we balance the act between these this influx of this Christian movement that's coming?
I'm going to sip my water first.
Because there will be some like disagreements, and
of course,
everyone's going to be on the same page.
Yeah. To be realistic, you're not going to be able to engage with it all, because you're right. There's a barrage of it, and there is so much. Part of it, I think, is sifting through some of the stuff which is reasonable, and by reasonable, I don't just mean it's stuff that you agree with necessarily. But there are some people out there who are just out to shock and entertain, and but also, again, just coming back to what Tina was saying, I think just remaining curious. There are some better, podcasts, radio shows, and that sort of thing, and some, like I said, which are just out to shock and to entertain. But try and just take what you can from them. I listen to a number of them, and some of them I just, dismiss outright, and some of them, have shaped my own thinking. I'd recommend the Unbelievable podcast with, what's his name, Justin Brierley. There are lots of them out there. But as a maturer person, I think, again, the other thing I would say, again, talk to the young people.
Yeah.
They have a good finger on the pulse of what's kind of happening out there.